What's up everyone, this is Takai, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about variable ND filters. Variable NDs are filters that you put in front of your camera lens and the filter will darken your image. Unless you like jittery and everything's in focus footage, you're not going to be able to shoot with a shallow depth of field and the standard double your frame rate shutter speed while outdoors, because both of those settings are going to be letting in a lot of light, and shooting outdoors means that you're working with a ton of light. So you would need a variable ND filter to darken the image and give you an extra layer of control over your exposure. And this filter allows you to adjust the intensity of how much light it cuts out, allowing you to shoot at slower shutter speeds or shallower f-stops while outside. There's two different types of ND filters, variable and fixed. Variable lets you adjust the exposure by rotating the filter, while fixed is a set exposure that you can't change. For the most part, I would recommend a variable ND because it gives you more options, since you could change the exposure, where if you had fixed NDs, you would have to buy more of them since you can't adjust the intensity. When buying an ND filter, I don't really recommend buying cheaper ones because they're not as flexible in intensity of darkness as a pricier one, and cheaper ones also have color shift. So buying a cheaper one is still going to leave you limited in what f-stops you can use, and you may have to color correct more in post. If you want ultimate flexibility in your f-stop choices, I would recommend buying a filter that can cut out at least 8 stops of light. Let's say that when shooting outdoors, in order to get proper exposure, you have to set your camera to f22, but everyone and their moms hates f22 and would rather shoot at f1.4 for that cinematic goodness. So if you're shooting at 1.4 outdoors, your camera is going to be overexposed because shooting at 1.4 is going to be letting in a ton of light. But having an 8-stop ND filter will give you proper exposure outdoors at 1.4, assuming that your shutter speed is double the frame rate and your ISO is set to the lowest setting. And to explain why that is, f-stops are measured from 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, and 22. Each of these numbers represents one f-stop. So if our camera is set to 1.4, an 8-stop ND filter will cut out 8 stops of light, bringing the exposure to f22 without actually changing the f-stop setting from 1.4 in camera. Where if you bought a cheaper filter that only cuts out 5 stops, you'll only be able to get your exposure to an f8. We still haven't changed our camera from the f1.4 setting. It's the variable ND that we're using that takes that 1.4 exposure and brings it down to a darker f-stop without actually affecting the depth of field. So with a 5-stop ND, bringing a 1.4 exposure down to an f8, your camera is going to be 3 stops overexposed because originally we're exposing for f22. So you would have to change your camera's f-stop from 1.4 to f4 for a proper exposure with a 5-stop ND. So I would take that 1.4 and add 3 stops, which means it'll move from 2 to 2.8 to 4, and then that will give us a proper exposure. But that also means that you're not going to be able to have as blurry of a background. Keep in mind that every camera and lighting scenario is going to be different, and you're going to get different results if you're shooting in a darker outdoor environment or if you're shooting in log. But if you want the maximum flexibility in how much exposure you can cut out and what f-stops you can use, I would recommend buying at least an 8-stop filter. The last thing I would recommend when buying an ND filter is if you have multiple filter sizes on your lenses, then I would buy the ND filter that matches the size of your biggest lens, and then buy step-up rings to adapt your smaller thread lenses to fit the size of that filter so that you don't have to buy multiple filters. And if you want to see a video that I've made about step-up rings, click the card up here. Me personally, I've always liked using the Tiffin variable ND because I've never noticed any dramatic color shift, and it pretty much covers me at every single exposure level, and it cuts out 8 stops of light. So that's the video for today, guys, and if you have any sort of confusion about the f-stop discussion that I was having, please don't hesitate to ask a question down in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer it as clearly as I can because it is kind of a confusing topic. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my channel for more filmmaking related content. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.